Now, for the next few weeks or so, political parties are entering coalition discussions following the announcement of the final election results on Sunday by the IEC. Now, for the first time in 30 years, the African National Congress lost its majority, securing only 40.18% of the vote. And this while former President Jacob Zuma's MK party had a very strong first showing. Now, the new parliament must convene within 14 days of the final results being declared, and its first order of business will be to elect a speaker and then a president. So what's going to happen? What are the various permutations moving forward? To help us answer this and, of course, more questions, we joined virtually by Head of Diplomacy and Foreign Policy at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Chris Landsberg. Professor Landsberg, always good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thanks for having me. I think we should also mention that I head up the Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership, so that I'm not accused of, moving out of my lane, which is foreign policy. But I think this matter is too important just to leave to political scientists.
Absolutely.
And us foreign policy people, we don't have a say.
Noted. Now, Professor, I want to start by just taking a quick peek at an article that you co-authored with Ibrahim Fakir, in which you look at, where we are as a country, asking the question whether we are perhaps at the same point that we were. I mean, obviously, given what has happened with all of those differences notwithstanding, but are we finding ourselves once again as a country at that point where we were in 1994, as you say, on the brink of implosion, so to speak, given what's happening politically, socio-economically? Where do you feel we find ourselves right now?
Sure, and I would have given you the same answer as I did before the election, as I'm going to give you now. What drove Ibrahim and I to ask the question whether there are similarities with the immediate pre-94 period or that negotiation period, which necessitated almost an urgency for the then oppressive apartheid government to finally agree to engage with its interlocutors. We had to make the case for a GNU. I mean, we didn't want to make the case for a GNU as a nicety, toy with it, just bring people in. There must be a set of prevailing urgent reasons in society that would necessitate a GNU. So let me just run to 2 or 3 for you. Of course, it's different. The context is different, but the similarities are remarkable. The ANC reached a point just before signing the interim constitution, which led to the elections of 1994, where they realized that if the bickering and the grandstanding and the antipathy between them and the negotiation partners continue, that they would, to quote President Nelson Mandela, inherit a basket case of an economy. There was the assassination of Chris Hani, which took us closer to the brink. There was mistrust in society. Racially, the society was divided. So there were circumstances that propelled us and said there's a moment to hold hands together. Ironically, I must just tell you that the party who insisted on a GNU and was pushed for by what was called a champion of the Rooi Gevaar, the late Joe Slovo, but it's the National Party that pushed for a GNU, and they pulled out of that government 2 years later. Interesting. I don't think those circumstances prevail in our country right now. Even the results tell us that if there's one thing we can interpret, and let me start with the ANC, for them to be dipped to 40%, the voters has sent a message that you have not come close to changing the country in the direction in which we do, and then we could add corruption, the diminishing issues of social cohesion and the like, and mistrust in politics. The fact that you had so many parties, some of them literally campaigning on racial basis, shows to you that we've moved away from the vision of the Constitution rather than closer to it. So I think the circumstances prevail for a GNU, not just a coalition. I want to make that clear.
So the way things are right now, though, and given the ideological differences between the various parties, is that a viable option, though, the government of national unity? Because if you look at the coalitions, and perhaps it speaks more to how difficult it's going to be to form coalitions with the different parties, but it would seem as though, as you say, it was the Nationalist Party that pushed for the GNU previously. At this point, do you get the sense that anybody is pushing for that first and foremost, Professor Landsberg? And or is it just lip service? Do you get a sense that anybody really wants that?
Look, if you want to give people the benefit of the doubt and take them at their word, then the answer is obviously yes. I mean, it's been a while that I've heard so many political parties utter the words, let's act in the national interest, in the interest of the people, not in the party interests, right? If you give them the benefit of the doubt. However, words can roll off the tongue very easily. I do have a view, my considered view is that I don't think some realize quite what it would take and the change it would take in both attitude, and listen very carefully, Sakina, and I say this humbly, and a willingness to compromise and to almost put your manifesto aside and go and agree on a new common manifesto for everybody. I think some parties are more serious than others. And let me give you two examples, because I want to try and be nuanced in this conversation. I think the ANC got a real scare. I think the ANC have been humbled by what happened to them. And I've picked up a deliberate change in tone, which augurs very well. I have to say about the DA that I was concerned on Sunday and prior to Sunday, but when you and Leanne went through the newspapers this morning, you can feel and hear and see the tectonic plates shifted. I like that quote by Mr. I just called him Minister. Well, let me not preempt things. Mr. Tony Leon, he said time is of the essence. So let me just conclude this key question that you've asked. There is need for a serious change in attitude on the part of all political parties. Confidence must be built and trust above all. But if nobody's willing to go in there, willing to compromise, then I don't think we should waste the country's time, then stay out and decide to go to the opposition benches or try and form something that could oust the ANC as the dominant party.
So the ANC, of course, is caught between a rock and a hard place given this election outcome. And they are obviously weighing up all their options, be it a government of national unity, being them going into coalitions with a party, various parties, and also what the various permutations of that may be. But that being said, you speak about parties having to almost put aside their own ideological beliefs in order to put the country first. Is that likely to happen, given just how fiercely these parties have gone out on the campaign trail to protect the interest of their various constituencies, though?
Okay, Sakira, again, let me try and put it in simpler terms. What I'm saying, if any party is not willing to do it, and I must say, I think it's unfair the way on which MK is being picked on. The statements of President Zuma is constantly highlighted by some, and some are even making the case, and the DA and the Freedom Front Plus in particular, in fact, Mr. Groenewald, who has who garnered far fewer votes than Mr. Zuma's party did, or the MK, because there's a court case ongoing, went to the extent of saying that they will do, and I quote, everything in their power to make sure that the EFF and the MK doesn't join a government of national unity. I want to say to you, Sakina, I think the statement you made that the ANC seems to be to find itself between a rock and a hard place, I actually disagree with that sentiment, and it's a widespread sentiment out there. I actually think the ANC has been the one, in spite of the DA and the Freedom Front Plus and others saying they don't want to come near Julius Malema and former President Zuma, the ANC, and you've had it on Business Day, it's actually front page news, I saw this morning, they have reached out even to the MK. There is no rock and a hard place here. It's other parties that say it's either a grand coalition, and may I add, I've been studying Helen Zille's politics for a while, Madame Zille's politics for a while. I think she really believes in a two-party dominant state. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to see some acrimony in the so-called Moonshot Pact, the multi-charter pact. What the ANC has done, and true to Fikile Mbalula, their SG's words, they've reached out to everybody, including the MK. So it's now up to MK to decide whether they're willing to engage. You see, if you're going to make statements that this is now about, it's a pivotal moment, it's a watershed moment, it's about the national interest, then the ANC remains the dominant party, can't stand there like the bride waiting to be courted by others. It must do the outreach. And I, in the spirit of the article written by Ibrahim and myself, I'm glad that the ANC says we're going to reach out to everybody and let people decide if they want to be part of a pact. So this binary, this choice, this cruel choice between ANC versus ANC and the rest, I think it's actually one that is fermented by some political parties, but it might come to haunt them, because if you try and keep some parties out, they will go and form what you've called an unholy alliance, and they will make it very difficult for a new government to govern this country. And you could see the kind of behavior that the EFF engaged in. You could see that tenfold in future.
So there are so many, again, scenarios that could play out, and I see quite a bit is being written about that right now. They've even been ranked as this being perhaps the most favorable, that to the least favorable scenario. But which one do you think would be best for South Africa?
So I'm so glad you asked this question. I think we're not critical enough of the private sector. The private sector, and I was fascinated by that interview that Sherwin Bryce-Pease did with the researcher from the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. The economist of Standard Bank, the chief economist of Standard Bank, even went to the extent yesterday of saying a ANC pact will keep the rand under 19 to the dollar, whereas a pact with the EFF and MK would clearly take the rand to at least 1950. Now, if we really reached a stage where Western liberal democracy and parties and markets are so dominant that they can almost say, we're not dictating to you, but just remind the consequences. You've asked me a question. which for us is the best scenario? A government of national unity. Invite as many in as possible, both into the executive and to the legislature and Chapter 9 institutions and all institutions of state to have a stake in this
Okay.
thing, and let parties decide whether they want to or not.